I know the court has to rule on all of them independently, but I would argue, Judge, that you should consider them jointly in terms of figuring out the big picture here, which is it is within the court's control to.
Well, let me clarify something, because I think the argument of the motion to sever the counts really wasn't so much as a ruling on
Yes, Your Honor.
limiting the evidence, just as a logistical, here's the indictment we're going to hand the jury.
And I meant altogether. So if you combine, let's say Your Honor was to grant that, it would be a significantly pared down indictment. Then, assuming that we're going to file motions in limine, that kind of.
And, this was part of the Trump team's entire defense's legal strategy. Several of the defendants, two so far, have asserted their right to a speedy trial. Of course, that's Sidney Powell and Ken Chesborough. And of course, Trump has argued the opposite, that he needs more time. He's trying to push this out till past the November 2024 general election. And as part of that severance motion, the attorneys for Powell and Chesborough argued that there's no way that the cases should be tried together. They need to be tried separately. They have an absolute right to a speedy trial. And although it was a compelling argument, Judge McAfee rejected it. And they also discussed several of the other factors under Georgia law that would make severance appropriate. But at the end of the day, severance is something that the defense has the burden of raising and proving, that the trials would be unfair if joined together. And the judge says they were unable to meet that burden.
And just looking at the point of this being unfair, that's because if two of these individuals had trials before that October 23rd, a lot of things would, especially if this is televised, right? A lot of things would be revealed, facts, details, charges, and that could impact all the other cases unfairly. Am I understanding that right? That it's just, I guess, safer when you're looking at something that is so political as well, to keep it all together for the sake of one side or the other not being able to cry foul here? Because this isn't just a legal case. As we know, the political implications are huge.
Oh, absolutely. And it's an issue of fairness and an issue of judicial economy. You have defendants going first, you have witnesses testifying, and, the judge said, even though the party said it may take up to 4 months, it may take much longer than that. So you're going to have jurors sitting through multiple trials. You're going to have witnesses that are going to have to testify time and time again. And from a fairness perspective, the defense just hasn't met its burden. And when you're looking at Georgia law, severance is really appropriate under one of three circumstances. If, there's so many defendants that it creates a likelihood of confusion of the law or the evidence. But, we saw the YSL case that the defense raised. You have more than a dozen defendants there, and they're all being tried at the same time. The second scenario arises when, evidence that might be admissible against one defendant is inadmissible against another. That sometimes happens in the confession or admission context where, the state wants to use a confession against one defendant. That defendant has invoked his or her right to remain silent, and another defendant is unable to cross-examine them. It's a Supreme Court case called Bruton, but it's unclear that any of that applies, that there's evidence that's going to be admissible against one co-conspirator, but not the other. And the third is inconsistent defenses. And the judge said, there's going to be finger pointing in this case, but it's not different from any other multi-defendant case. Everyone tries to blame someone else who's more culpable. So, given all the circumstances, the judge says, in the interest of judicial economy, having the case be televised once, the jurors hear the case once, all these witnesses, we're not going to have 19 trials. We're going to try to have one trial in this case. At least that's where things stand so far. This is a huge win for the prosecution and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, because it's going to put maximum pressure on these defendants now to either reach some sort of plea agreement, flip and cooperate against the former president, or get ready for trial in a short period of time.
And also, do you think after what we learned today, we could start to see some of these co-defendants start to flip?
I think so. It's interesting to see how this case, is handled differently from a legal strategy perspective than Jack Smith's case. Of course, Jack Smith took a surgical approach in D.C. He didn't charge any of the co-conspirators. They're all unindicted because he wanted to get that case to trial as quickly as possible. And it worked. Judge Chutkan there in D.C. scheduled a March 2024 trial date. In this case in Fulton County, Fani Willis wanted to charge everyone to put maximum pressure on them to flip, to cooperate. These aren't career criminals. These are attorneys. Many of them have never been arrested or spent any time in prison. So now that there's pressure on them, the case is actually scheduled for trial. I wouldn't be surprised to see folks like maybe Mark Meadows and others start to flip and start to cooperate. So that's her strategy. And that's why this case is different than the DC case.
Neama, the judge also said there as he wrapped up that, okay, let's start having weekly sessions on a Thursday or a Friday. What does he mean by weekly sessions, and what will happen within those weekly sessions now?
Well, we're going to see a lot of law in motion in this case. Just like there was a lengthy hearing today, we should expect to see this on a weekly basis. I would expect to see other severance motions. We already know that, Meadows and others are going to try to remove their case from state to federal court, saying that they were acting in their official capacity. The judge already raised the potential executive immunity issue that Trump is going to raise, saying that he can't be prosecuted by a state authority for acts in his official capacity as president. Of course, the state will say that, the audit and the litigation and campaigning just in general is not part of a president's official duties. But the judge is anticipating a lot of motions, a lot of legal arguments. So he's setting aside time every week to hear those arguments and sort through them.
So, John, do we know if Trump was even paying attention to this? Because we're looking at this radio interview that he just did with Hugh Hewitt saying if he's asked to testify, he will.
Yeah, and he said it for any of the cases that he faces, Kira, that he would take the stand. And listen, Donald Trump is certainly not new to being under oath questioned. The man's done hundreds of depositions, one of which was just released by the New York State Attorney General just a couple of days ago. So it's not too surprising that Donald Trump is saying that. Now, obviously, what he says and what he ultimately ends up doing are two very different.
To everything, seeing all the action in the courtroom on such a high-profile case, live television, for just day after day. I mean, this would be nonstop. I just can't even imagine what this could turn into if indeed this entire trial is televised and all the hearings that we have seen starting with today. I mean, this could really overshadow, the race for the White House in many ways.
Oh, absolutely. You talked about OJ. This will be the trial of the century. There won't be anything like it. It will take months. Imagine seeing Donald Trump in the courtroom. And, unlike federal court where the rules of criminal procedure 53 don't allow cameras or even still photography, that's why you have those courtroom sketch artists. We're going to see cameras in the courtroom. And this is going to, be something that legal nerds and lawyers like myself have lived for, because this is a trial unlike any other, the most politically charged prosecution in American history. Every single witness will be watched live by millions of people. And to see folks like Giuliani, Meadows, Powell, you might have Mike Pence in there testifying. It will be something unlike any other, much more dramatic than any of the January 6th hearings or testimony. We're going to have potentially a former president of the United States on the witness stand, subject to direct and cross-examination. It'll be real-life courtroom drama.
All right, Neama, I know this is speculation, but why do you think the judge is doing this? What could be the various scenarios here?
Well, knowing many judges in my 20 years of practice, I know that the number one way that folks reach some sort of agreement is the threat of trial. Doesn't matter if it's a civil trial or a criminal trial. People like to kick that can down the road. And look, I don't think Donald Trump will take any type of deal, nor would Willis offer him one. But when you're looking at the 18 other co-defendants, I think there is a deal to be had. I don't think Willis wants to prosecute 19 people. She wants to prosecute one person, Donald Trump, and have 18 cooperating co-defendants. Now, I'm not saying the judge is in cahoots or anything like that, but when judges are managing their calendar and they have lots of cases, the number one way to get cases to plead out or to settle is to hold that firm trial date. And I think that's what he's doing here.
And I think, John, also, it's just unprecedented, not just the cameras in the courtroom, that we could be watching every aspect.
We saw images of the inside of the courtroom, a reminder that this will be televised. And in that sense, Neama, what do you make of the arguments that we heard so far today and what the American people heard?
Well, I thought there were compelling arguments, and it's the first of many televised hearings that the American people will see in this case. And we're going to have hearings every week, and we know that this trial is going to last months, at least 4 months, according to the prosecution. But the judge was skeptical, thought it may take as much as 8 months. So imagine that's going to go well into the primary season, maybe even into the general election. So it's going to be real life courtroom drama. I thought the defense collectively did a good job in terms of Sidney Powell and Chesebro's lawyers making the arguments, but they did have the burden of proving severance. And the judge said, look, this is a RICO conspiracy. Most of the evidence against Powell and Chesebro is going to apply to the other defendants as well. Even though there's going to be finger pointing, that's not enough in terms of inconsistent defenses for the purpose of severance. So like Catherine said, Powell and Chesebro, they're not going to be severed from the other defendants. Of course, we'll see when former President Donald Trump's trial date is set. But for now, this was a big win for the prosecution today.
Catherine, there are still 17 other defendants here, including former President Trump. When are we expecting to learn more about their trials?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of this remains to be seen, just given
of still continued requests to sever some trials in the future. If the judge were to grant separate trials in this case, how would that impact the proceedings?
Well, it'd be great for Donald Trump because first, he's going to get a preview of what witnesses are going to say before his case actually goes to trial. And of course, that would push his case out. It'd have to be after the earlier trials happen. And we know that Trump's biggest strategy here is delay. If he delays this and he regains control of the White House, it's pretty well established that a sitting president can't be prosecuted, at least according to the Department of Justice. So most of his legal problems may go away. So, you know, obviously some of this is reading the tea leaves here, but the fact that Judge McAfee denied the severance motion with respect to Powell and Chesebro leads lawyers like myself to believe that he's probably going to do the same for Donald Trump. So again, even though Trump's motion wasn't on calendar today, this was something that his legal team was following very closely, and it does not bode well for his own chances of severance.
Catherine, really quickly, we know you're following all the twists and turns here. You keep us all honest on what's happening in the future with these cases. So what happens now?
well, look, I think we